Okay, it started recording. Okay, so people should be coming in now. I think we do have our first presenter ready, so I think we can get started. It's 7 o'clock on the dot. So again, welcome to the latest, the final weekend of SABR Virtual and the final Friday. Today I'm your host, Scott Fischthal, and should be a good set of presentations again. We've had so many good presentations. I think the people I've heard so many positive things about what we've been hearing over the last couple of weeks, and so I think we'll see some more here today. Today's speakers are going to be, first of all, we are going to have Gordon Gattie. He will be talking about the 50 hits, Ron Hunt's 1971 single season modern era record for times hit by pitch. Then we will have FX Flinn. We'll be opening a time capsule for us. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And then we will have Tyrone Brooks and Corey Smith talking about some of Major League Baseball's diversity initiatives and social justice resources. And then we're going to close out with Jeff Snider talking about the disappearance and reappearance of Garry Templeton's record. And we can find out then what record he's talking about. So we'll start with Gordon. And I guess before I do that, I have a disclaimer I have to read. So want to make sure everybody's aware that we are recording the session. So it will be posted online on SABR's YouTube channel. If you don't want to be recorded, you're free to leave the meeting right now. And a couple other things just to keep in mind. For questions, we'll take those questions in the chat window. So I'm going to keep everybody muted so that we don't have feedback and crosstalk and things like that. So just type your questions into the chat, and when Gordon's completed with his presentation, I will read off those questions as many of them as we can fit in the time that we have. So do set your microphones to mute, nevertheless, just in case something stray somehow finds its way in. And again, thanks for joining SABR Virtual. Hope you enjoy today. And so leading off, as I said, we do have Gordon Gattie. He is an engineer for the U.S. Navy. His baseball research interests include ballparks, historical trends, and statistical analysis. He's been a SABR member since 1998 and earned his PhD from SUNY Buffalo. I'm from the New York area, so SUNY is very familiar with, where he used baseball to investigate judgment performance in complex dynamic environments. Ever the optimist, he dreams of a Cleveland Indians-Washington Nationals World Series matchup, especially after the Nationals' 2019 World Series championship. So Gordon, you want to go ahead and share your screen?
Sounds good. Thank you, Scott, and good afternoon, everybody, and happy opening day. Thank you for joining us. And as we get started and I start talking about Ron Hunt's 1971 season, one of the things that got me interested in this subject was when I had started playing Little League. So when I was in Little League, there was a time where you go from adults pitching to pitchers, your fellow classmates pitching to you, and this is probably around the time I was 7, 8 years old. And I'll never forget my first game I was up there, went up to bat 4 times, struck out 4 times. I was waiting for the perfect pitch. It was a called third strike 3 times. 4th time I finally missed the line. On the second game, the first time I went up, I was up there for 1 pitch and I got a fastball right in the back. And later on in the game, I went up to bat again and the ball was coming inside and I turned away from the ball and it hit me square on the butt. And after that game, I'm like, why do people play baseball when they get hit so often? And it's certainly one of those things that kind of stuck with me when I started to play Little League and then as I progressed through high school and Legion ball. So that was one of the motivations for checking out this study. So one of the things that I'd like to share with you today is Ron Hunt's 1971 single season modern era record for times hit by pitch. And as a quick note, the way that I define modern era is the way modern era has been traditionally done in the past, where it starts with 1901. And the nice thing about that is it allows us to use the American League and the National League both at the same time. So, progressing here. Let's see. Page down. There we go. So as I mentioned, Ron Hunt established the modern era record in 1971, when coincidentally, that was the same year SABR was founded and conducted its first annual convention. So originally when we were planning this conference and it was going to be SABR 50, I thought, SABR 50, and Ron Hunt was hit by a pitch 50 times in a season as a record. That's a pretty cool coincidence as a baseball, lifelong baseball fan and researcher. We love our numbers. One of the other neat things was that in the very first SABR Baseball Research Journal back in 1972, there was an article written about renewed interest in hit-by-pitch records. And one of the things that was interesting was, at the time, the major league record was 49. The overall record for single season hit-by-pitch, including the 1900s, was 49. So since that time, it's been updated. One of the things that's been pretty neat about some of the research that I've been doing is just checking out Ron Hunt's, not only the 1971 season, but the seasons surrounding that. So he led the major leagues in hit by pitch for 6 consecutive years, which is really, really noteworthy to be a leader in a category, in a very specific category for 6 years. And when you see the amounts that he led by, it's reminiscent of Babe Ruth with home runs in the 1920s. And even Joe DiMaggio's 44-game hitting streak compared to similar hitting streaks. The other question is, we've seen a lot lately about baseball's 3 true outcomes. We go up, batter goes up to bat, and you'll get one of 3 outcomes: home run, strike, or a walk. We've seen those rise in increase in frequency over the past 25 years. And one of the things that I wondered was, well, how does hit by pitch fall into that? Does hit by pitch, is it in this particular case, is it similar to a walk where we're going to see it more often, or is it in the category all by itself? So one of the things that I started to speculate was, will we see more hit by pitches during future seasons? So today's lineup, we've got 3 hitters. First, we're going to look at hit by pitch statistics. Second is we'll dive a little bit into Ron Hunt's 1971 season, share some quirks that I found over time. And then we'll start to look at the future of hit by pitches from this year going forward. So first, we'll take a look at hit by pitches. So hit by pitches have been around for a long time. As you know, at one point in the 1800s, you could also get a hit from a scorekeeping perspective. But it started in 1884 to discourage pitchers from explicitly hitting batters to keep them off the plate. So, of course, with a lot of scorekeeping nuances, the American Association started in the 1884 season, but the National League didn't start until 3 years later, and the Union Association did not get into that much at all. From the Major League Baseball glossary, I'll just read you the definition real quick, that a hit by pitch occurs when a batter is struck by a batted ball without swinging at it. He is awarded first base as a result. Strikes supersede hit by pitches, meaning if the umpire rules that the pitch was in the strike zone or that the batter swung, the hit by pitch is nullified. One of the things that's really interesting is it doesn't say anything about trying to get out of the way of the ball. And certainly batters that have come up with a lot of high hit by pitch totals are a lot of times known for prodding the plate and a lot of times not moving too quickly when the ball is coming in their direction. So as a starting point, we've got the definition. So on slide 6, one of the things that I wanted to show real quick was how hit by pitches have changed over time. So the x-axis is the season.
Gordon, I'm going to jump in just a second.
Yes.
People are still hearing that high-pitched whistle, even though I was on mute, so it may be coming from you if you can turn your volume down.
Sure.
Okay, thanks.
We'll do that. And how is that? Is that any better? Testing. 1, 2, 3, testing. Is that any better?
I'm getting much better from everybody. I wasn't hearing it myself, so.
Okay. I don't have any other electronics around, so I'm not quite sure.
Nope, it's much better now.
Okay. All right. So on slide 6, basically looking at season hit by pitches over time. On the x-axis is the seasons, starting in 1901 with the formation of the American League and has how I define the modern era moving forward. And it goes all the way to 2019. And on the y-axis is the number of times hit by pitch. And you'll see that the American League and the National League have been relatively similar over time. So from roughly the early 1900s until the mid 40s, There was a steady decline in hit by pitches over time as a cumulative result over for each season. Started to increase a little bit during the 1950s and 60s, and then it started to dip a little bit in the 1970s. And of course, this is where Ron Hunt starts to show up. It dips toward the end of the late 70s, and then it goes up again in the 80s, and then really it skyrockets in the late 90s and early 2000s. And one of the things that I've started to try to figure out is, why do we have those spikes? Why is it so noteworthy? Was it a certain policy that was in place? Was it just different types of pitches? Were people stressing different things? Did the strike zone change? What is it? Don't have an answer to that yet. So on the next slide, we want to look at single season leaders. So you'll see that there's only 3 that are bold-faced, and those are the ones from the 20th century. But the overall single season leader of all time is Huey Jennings, who accomplished that in 1896 with the Baltimore Orioles. He was one of the guys, along with John McGraw, that really played a lot of hit and run ball and came up with a lot of hit and run type strategies, small ball type strategies in the 1890s. He was hit by 51 pitches. Number 2 is Ron Hunt, who did it in 1971 when he hit 50. And then you'll see the next 10 of the next 12 are actually from the 19th century. And it's only Baylor and Biggio that even came close to approaching Hunt's record. One of the other things that's kind of interesting is in 13th place is Brandon Geyer of the Indians, who did it in 2016 when it happened 31 times. And also Steve Evans, who was an outfielder for the 1910 St. Louis Cardinals, who also was hit 13 times. And also Jason Kendall in the late 70s, I think it was late 90s. I think it was 96 and 97 or 97 and 98, that he also was hit 31 times. But it's kind of interesting with the way that the 3 true outcomes have happened over the last few years, that we haven't seen a little bit more, a little higher numbers coming up, and people showing up, more recent players showing up on the single season leaderboard. So on the next slide, this is one of those things that kind of struck me as a little bit of an aha moment when I started to look at Ron Hunt's records. So when Ron Hunt led the majors in hit by pitch for 6 consecutive seasons, as shown in the blue line, he did so by an incredibly wide margin. So Ron Hunt was the leader in the National League. The American League leader varied. Obviously in 1968 they were close, and then in the early 70s not so much. And then the number 2 player in the National League is shown in the black line. One of the things that I want to mention real quick is that in 1971, right here, when the gap between Ron Hunt's record and the 2nd place finisher was the largest, the person who was hit 9 times is actually Rusty Staub, his teammate in Montreal. And not only that, but Hunt had 50 hit by pitches and 638 plate appearances, while Staub was hit 9 times and 690 plate appearances. So to think that Hunt, made his record at a time when nobody else in the National League was hit more than 10 times is a rather phenomenal achievement. The other thing that's pretty interesting is that how it follows a little bit of a bell curve, where Hunt was pretty consistent in 68, 69, 70, and then in 72 and 73. With getting right around 25 hit by pitches per season. So with that, we want to jump a little bit more into the 1971 season. So one of the questions that I've had is, who is Ron Hunt? Outside the answer for an interesting trivia question about single season hit by pitch records, who is the guy? Well, so he's a 12-year veteran, played for 5 different National League teams, and one of the neat things was he came up with the Mets. He was the first New York Met to start an All-Star game when he started in the '64 All-Star game. He was a two-time All-Star. When he finished second in the 1963 Rookie of the Year voting, he actually finished second to Pete Rose. So not bad company to keep to finish second there. He also finished with a career on-base plus slugging of 715. So he was just, even as a middle infielder, he was just above league average when it came to OPS plus. As shown here on the slide. And then the other interesting piece was, for his career, he hit 223 doubles, 39 homers, and he actually was hit by a pitch more times than he doubled. When I saw that, I wanted to dive even deeper into it, because I don't know a whole lot of players that have been hit more times than doubles that they've hit in the times of their career. So specifically, when we start to look at the 1971 season, even though he was hit 50 times, he still played in 152 games. Having played ball into my 30s and in a couple of adult leagues, I applaud the guy for getting plunked 50 times and still getting out there and playing over 150 games a season. On April 10th, he recorded his first hit by pitch. May 26th was the first of 6 games that he was plunked twice. One of the pieces that's interesting about those 6 games where he was plunked, 4 times the Mets actually had scored double digits, so the games weren't even close. The other 2 times they were relatively close, but him getting hit was not necessarily one of the factors in the game. On June 25th and 26th was the only time all season when he was hit at least once in a 3-game stretch. And ironically enough, it was against his former team, the New York Mets. He was hit June 25th. There was a doubleheader. He was hit once in the opening game, and then twice in the nightcap, and then the following afternoon he was also hit. On August 7th, he broke the modern day record. As I mentioned, earlier, that the modern day record at the time was Steve Evans, who accomplished that in 1910 with the St. Louis Cardinals. He broke the record when he was hit with his 32nd pitch, and the newspapers had a ton of articles about his accomplishment. Even with doing that, he did not receive an All-Star selection. He didn't receive a top 25 MVP finish, but he still was a significant contributor to the 1971 Expos. So we've heard a lot about wins above replacement as a metric for measuring player performance. So he did finish with 4.1 WAR according to Fangraphs and 5.1 WAR according to BaseballReference.com. Basically, depending on who you look at, and if you look at Fangraphs, he finished second to Staub for contributing to the 71 Expos success. And then if you're looking at Baseball Reference, he finished third, behind Staub and I forget who else. But one of the things that was really interesting was as Hunt was starting to approach his record of breaking Stone's record for the hit by pitches in the modern era, that's when Pepe had wrote an article about him getting hit all the time, and basically some of the strategies that Hunt was using to try to get in the way of the ball, whether or not, and of course there were always questions about whether or not he was intentionally not trying to get out of the way of the ball or not. But one of my favorite quotes came out of that article, which said, "The guy must drink Novocaine for breakfast." So on slide 12, there are some interesting quirks that came out of his 1971 season that I was really, really surprised by. First of all, he was hit more at home than on the road. That wasn't overly surprising. But at night, he had more play. He was actually hit by rate-wise. He was hit more often during the day because he was hit once every 11.9 plate appearances, whereas at night it was in 14.5 appearances. He was hit 32 times when Montreal won, which is especially noteworthy considering they only won 71 out of 161 games that year. To think that they only won, roughly 80% of the games, and he still had two-thirds of the time when he was hit was when they won is a pretty. I'm not sure if it's an accomplishment, but it's a noteworthy fact. So he was hit 18 times when they lost. He was hit the most against the New York Mets, his former team, of course, that 4 times in that one 3-game set. He also faced the Mets 75 times during the 1971 season, so it's not surprising that he would have a lot of hit by pitches when he has a lot of plate appearances. However, he had the fewest hit by pitches against the Pirates. So he actually appeared against the Pirates 76 times, and not once was he hit by any of the Pirates players. Now, I'm not sure, Pirates pitchers. I don't know if that says more about Hunt's relationship with the Mets and the Pirates pitching staff, but it's rather an interesting quirk. The other piece is that he was hit most often on the road at San Diego Stadium 6 times, and he only appeared at the plate 16 times. In fact, he was 1 for 10 at San Diego Stadium that season. So at the time when Hunt achieved his record, he broke the previous record by Huey Jennings and of course the modern era record that I mentioned before. On the right-hand side is a picture of some of the fisticuffs that he got into. This is actually after he achieved the record, and it was a game against the San Diego Padres. And basically, he had been hit first, and he had been hit a second time, and then the second time is when things started to get a little bit out of hand, a little unraveled. So one of the things that I wanted to show is this is the same slide that I showed earlier, but I just wanted to show you where Hunt's achievement was in relation to all the other achievements throughout the course of baseball history. The fact that he didn't actually achieve it here in the early ball era, where you had a lot of standouts that really stood out in the crowd, and he didn't have it in the in more recent times when you had more higher hit by pitches cumulatively by both leagues. So that being said, you got to wonder, well, who is this Huey Jennings character? So Huey Jennings was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1975. As I mentioned earlier, he played with John McGraw, Wee Willie Keeler. He was part of the 1890s National League Baltimore Orioles, and he was widely considered the National League's best shortstop during the late 1890s. He did lead the National League in hit by pitches with a high watermark of 51 in 1896. And of course, similar to Hunt, he did have a reputation for crowding the plate. One of the interesting stories about Jennings is that in 1897, he was struck unconscious by an Amos Russi fastball, and it hit him fairly close to the temple, not like Chapman, but it was fairly close. It basically went down, remained unconscious for 4 days before getting back into it. And yet, he gets up, and the following year he's back in the lineup all season, and he goes back and he's able to lead the National League in hit by pitches. So hit by pitches by an absolute metric is one thing, but I want to call out a really good article that was written by SABR member Garry Belville just a couple of years ago that appeared in the fall 2018 Baseball Research Journal, titled Ron Hunt, Coco Crisp, and the Normalization of Hit by Pitch Statistics. So similar to OPS plus and a lot of metrics that try to normalize so that league average is 100, and then you basically see how much the performance varies over or under from that mark. It basically did the same thing for hit by pitch. And then what it does is it looks at hit by pitch percentage per plate appearance, and it takes into account overall rate for the league and some other statistics within a historical context. So from Gary's article, the hit by pitch single season leaders, a little bit refined compared to the hit by pitch leaders, is shown on slide 16. So you'll see that Huey Jennings is still on there. He fell to number 6, and basically what this is showing is that Ron Hunt's achievement was so noteworthy because people were not getting hit in the late 60s, early 70s the way that they were in the 1890s. And to show that he was getting hit at a rate almost 15 times more than the league average is really saying something. So it's not just that absolute number, but it's also the relative number that's interesting there. The other piece is that you wouldn't be surprised at all to see Don Baylor in here, especially in the prime of his career with the Yankees and the Red Sox when he was hit several times. In fact, Hunt has was one of the watermarks was his getting hit 35 times with the 86 Red Sox. Another interesting thing is that Hunt appeared not only with 71 and 72, but also down in 69 too, as he was making his way up playing with the Giants. So that kind of brings to question, well, what's the future of the hit by pitch? Will there be more hit by pitches in the future? Will we see less in the future? So looking at career leaders, and this is strictly absolute counts hit by pitch, you'll see that there's been a lot of folks that have played in 20th and 21st centuries that have started to make their way up the list, especially as people have had longer and longer careers. And you'll see a lot of the players that you would expect to be up there, like Biggio and Baylor and Kendall. And Hunt is still up there, even though he only played for 12 seasons. So what are some of the things that might influence hit by pitch? Well, it's certainly a reaction of injuries that players have had. So everything from the serious, something that curtailed Mickey Cochran's career, to those that are fatal, like the hitting of Chapman. Certainly increased body counts. Increased body protection is definitely another one of those things that you have less fear standing in the batter's box, so you're going to be able to lean into a pitch a little bit more than you might otherwise have done that. Also related to that is batting stance and posture changes. And one of the things that I'm planning on doing next is looking at how batting stances and posture changes have changed over time to see how often people are crowding the plate. How often are they crouching more like a Pete Rose or hitting more like an Ichiro, or how much are they just kind of standing in there? And then the other piece is Major League Baseball policies. So when I had initially submitted this abstract, obviously it was before our current pandemic, but one of the things that I was hoping to look at was that Major League Baseball had adopted a new policy that was going to hold managers a little bit more accountable than they had in the past. And one of the things that I wanted to see was, all right, has that impacted hit by pitch counts at all? So we'll see what that does in the 60-game season. So one of the other quick things I just want to look at real quick is basically I started to do a little bit of a correlation between hit by pitches and the three true outcomes. So I know we're running a little short on time. So on the left-hand side, you'll see the correlations with absolute totals. And for all the statistics folks out there, it is 117 degrees of freedom, and we did do it with a 95% confidence interval, so it's noted there. But one of the things that was interesting was when we did the correlations with the rate, it was interesting that the hit by pitches was did increase with the strikeout rate. So as strikeout rates started to go up, the hit by pitches would start to go up. But that was the reverse of that was true when it came to hit by pitches and walks. So when you're looking at correlations, if you see a correlation value of 1, that means as one value goes up, another goes up linearly. If you see -1, it means as one goes up, one goes down. And if you see a 0, that means it's random, and there's not necessarily any correlation. One bit of warning though, correlation does not equal causation. A lot of times in statistics, you'll see correlations and people will say one thing that was impacted by something else, but that's not necessarily true. So a couple other things that are influencing hit by pitch is basically uniform changes, the material, the fit, the style. Back in the early 1900s, things were relatively loose fitting, and then things kind of tightened up in the 70s, and things kind of loosened up a little bit. Styles change over time, the fit changes over time, material changes over time. One of the other things that'll be interesting is if we ever get to the point where we have an automated strike zone, what will that do to hit by pitch counts? Will we see hit by pitch counts, or will we see them go away entirely? Is that even remotely possible? So when it comes to the rise of the three true outcomes, one of the things that I looked at was, as I mentioned on the previous slide, was that strikeout and hit by pitch rates are moderately positively correlated, but the home run and hit by pitch rates are weakly negatively correlated. So one of the things that I'm looking at next is I'm looking at what are some of the hit by pitch records that are in the Negro leagues, the minor leagues, and also the international leagues. One of the things that's interesting about looking at international leagues, and that's international leagues as in Japan, Korea, Australia, Italy, not the international league, is looking at, is there some kind of correlation between aggression in a culture and hit by pitch counts? A little bit of a stretch, but it's definitely something worth exploring. And the other thing is looking specifically at why Ron Hunt had 50 hit by pitches in 1971 compared with those other seasons. So in conclusion, I just want to mention that Ron Hunt's 1971 single season record really is a unique accomplishment. The fact that he was hit 15 times more than the league average alone is something that's noteworthy. The fact that the highest total from him is 15 less than what he accomplished, and it happened 15 years later. And relatedly, that was also the second highest hit by pitch plus that we have had since Hunt's 1971 season. And based on a couple of quick numbers, and I know I went over them really quick, but I wouldn't be surprised to see a slight increase in hit by pitch counts if we see that baseball events are continuing to be reduced to the three true outcomes. So on the next slide, I've got some references that are there for folks. I definitely want to encourage people to read Gary's article in the recent Baseball Research Journal, and there's also a great article on 538 that talked about Ron Hunt's and some of the statistics there. So thank you for your time and attention, and with that, I will take any questions.
So thank you, Gordon. That was a great presentation. Thanks for all of that interesting information on Ron Hunt. I vaguely remember Ron Hunt as a Mets fan in the early 70s. He was there for a brief period of time too, back before then. There were a couple of questions that we did get, but before that, I did want to point out that there's a modern day Ron Hunt and Tim Locastro right now, who last year had 22 hit by pitches and only 250 plate appearances. He had 50% more hit by pitches than walks last year.
Wow.
And almost 50% as many hit by pitches as hits.
Ooh.
So very interesting. But I had a few questions here. Let me throw those out quickly. One of them was a question of where did Ron, this is from Stephen, where did Hunt stand in the batter's box and how did he feel about getting hit so much?
So it's a great question. He definitely, the toes were on the inside of the batter's box. And one of Hunt's tricks was instead of turning away from the pitch, he would turn into a pitch. So he was able to contort his body so that people thought he was turning away from the pitch, but he was actually turning into the pitch. So
was there a particular pitcher who hit him more than others, or was it just
great question? I don't know. I don't know.
Okay. Daryl Grigsby asked, and this was kind of answered in the chat, but I'll throw it out there anyway. Where was Hunt hitting in the batting order, and was there any difference in how often he scored when he was hit by pitch versus getting on in other ways?
So he was hitting leadoff mostly for the Giants. There were times that he was hitting leadoff and he was in the second spot for the Mets. There was some incomplete data for the late 60s as far as some of the specific situations, like who was up when he was hit, or who was pitching when he was not who was pitching, but there were questions about if there were runners in scoring position and what the game situation was at the time.
Yeah, so you mentioned the ways that Hunt would make it appear that he was getting out of the way when he was actually getting in the way of the pitch. And one question that came from Garry D is did umpires ever really change the way they reacted? Were there times where they didn't award him first base, and do you think that the likelihood of an umpire deciding not to award somebody first base has changed over time since then?
That is a great question, and I don't know, because you got to think. I mean, if he was over 60, if he was over 25 hit by pitches 6 years in a row, you're going to have a reputation for getting hit by a pitch, and people are going to see it coming. And I didn't see any evidence for relationship with specific umpires, but that's a great question.
I will say Jeff Snider, by the way, mentioned that in 1971, Nolan Ryan hit him 4 times.
Thank you.
I think we're actually out of time at 7:32, so we need to move on to our next presenter. But again, thank you for another interesting presentation. And if anyone wants to reach out to Gordon, I can send him some email through. All the information should be in the SABR directory. So thank you again. And
please do. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Okay, thanks. All right, we can switch over to FX. FX, you should be able to take the screen here. I think I've given you co-host capability.
Yes, thank you very much.
You're in there, okay.
All right.
Okay, thanks. And I just wanted to show something that I happened to find. I don't know where I put it. I had it here a minute ago. I actually found, as I was cleaning out my office, a blank copy of the SABR 2003 survey. And of course, my office is a mess, so I can't find it now.
Hey, Scott, I'm on my iPad and I've got my PowerPoint up, but when I hit the share content, I'm not seeing a way to do it. Can you pull it up for me?
Let me see. Yeah, it's right. You did post it, so I'll go bring that up. But while I'm doing that, let me just introduce you before we even start. And this is FX Flinn. He is a senior member of the SABR Board of Directors. He was first elected as treasurer in 2001, and he owns and operates an IT consulting firm specializing in data warehousing, knowledge management, and process development. After graduating from Cornell University, he worked in the trade book publishing industry for Doubleday and Bantam. In 1981, he became involved with the Rotisserie League founders, and in 1984 published the first book on fantasy sports, Rotisserie League Baseball. He lives in Quechee, Vermont, and he's going to be opening this time capsule for us. This presentation is SABR 2020. What did we get right in 2003? So now let's see if we can. So you weren't able to bring it up, right? So let me.
Well, I've got it up, but
able to show it.
I'm surprised at what my options are here.
Yeah, you were. When you hit the share screen, let's see. I've got one participant, and I can see your smiling photo right now. So maybe do you have two screens? Well, you said you're on the iPad though.
Yeah. No, I'm sorry that
All right, let me give it a try.
I'm not doing this from home unexpectedly. My apologies.
Oh, that's okay.
Hi, FX. This is Jacob. I can share your PowerPoint file right now, and you can just let me know when to advance the screen.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jacob. Yeah, go ahead and start the slideshow. Okay, that's outstanding. So in the run-up to our convention in Denver in 2003, we put together a survey. There was a group of us, maybe a dozen people, who worked on coming up with the questions and then getting the survey answered online. Actually, we provided a URL to a page on the SABR website, and people were able to go through and not only answer questions, but also make some comments. That we did ask people to ask or to answer the questions in terms of what they thought would be the case, not what they wanted to be the case. Nevertheless, there was a great amount of wishing in the answers. There's no doubt about it. Next slide, please. We, at the time that this was conducted, the baby boomers were 40 to 57 and the Gen Xers were 21 to 38. So when you look at the age distribution, you can see that by and large, the SABR members who participated were baby boomers, and the non-members who participated were Gen X. I thought that was an interesting split. That said, it turned out that there was virtually no difference in the spread of the answers. Next slide, please. So I had to go back and remind myself of what was in the news in the winter of 2003, and it was all about how whether and when consolidation would happen. The Expos, the Devil Rays, now the Rays, the Twins, and the Padres were all targets to be consolidated. But there were also mentions of the Angels, the Diamondbacks, the Royals, the A's, and the Marlins. And that never happened because when John Henry sold the Marlins to Loria, and Loria sold the Expos to MLB, and then John Henry acquired the Red Sox for $660 million in late 2002, early 2003. That pretty much put the kibosh on consolidation, it turned out. But at the time, that was not apparent. Next slide, please. No, back one, I believe. Okay, no, I reorganized this a little bit. Please, next slide, go ahead. So a number of the questions that we asked had to do with the structure of Major League Baseball. We asked about franchise shifts, and the respondents correctly identified the switch from Montreal to DC, and they also correctly predicted that there would be no other, that effectively there would be no other changes. franchise value has since increased, and a plurality got that right. The majority did not. Postseason ratings, which are now lower, 70% of respondents thought they would be the same or higher. So our strong belief in baseball didn't allow us to see what the writing on the wall, I guess. There's really been no change in the number of teams outside the United States. There was talk back then about teams moving perhaps to Mexico City or a Cuban team. None of that transpired. Half of respondents said there would only be 1 or 2 teams outside the US, and they were correct. We asked if the antitrust exemption would still be in place. And 60% of respondents thought that there would either be changes or it would be revoked. In fact, there has been no change. And finally, and this turns out to be just for the pandemic audience, we asked if there would be an interruption. And 78% thought there would be a strike, 66% thought there might be a lockout, 40% thought there might be a national emergency. And it turns out that 40% was more or less correct. Next slide, please. Also, in terms of the business of baseball, we asked about new ballparks. And remember, what was in the news then? There was this sense that baseball needed to consolidate, and there was also excitement over the fact that there were some new ballparks coming online. But still, only 15% of our respondents thought there would be over 6 new ballparks built by 2020, and in fact, there have been 8. And all of them got some public money. 32% thought that 0 to 5 of the ballparks would not be open air. In fact, there's only 1. In terms of artificial turf, we're now down to 1, Tropicana. That was not something that we were seeing happen. Finally, Questec was much in the news then, and that was an early system for evaluating the performance of umpires. And so we asked, will electronic systems replace any of the umpires' duties? And there was a spread of opinion, but there was pretty consistently about 40 to 60% saw some kind of instant replay coming into place. And that, in fact, is what has happened. Next slide, please. Another thing that we asked was, what are we going to do about the old ballparks, about Fenway, Yankee Stadium, Wrigley, et cetera? And you can see that the 1,300 plus respondents got it right, that Fenway would be renovated. However, they were wrong about Yankee Stadium because it was, well, I suppose you could characterize it as being rebuilt, but really it's the second Yankee Stadium, so that would be a rebuild, certainly not a renovation. Wrigley set as a renovation. Shea, 85% said it should be rebuilt. That's what's happened. And with the Dodgers ballpark, that was pretty evenly split, and it's still there. So next slide, please. Now, there was something else that was going on in the early aughts. There was nothing to see here. Everybody was talking about the home run binge. Barry Bonds had hit 73, and then in 2002, he won the MVP again at age 38. And on November 9th of 2002, Jack Curry in the Times quoted him as saying, "I'm trying to figure out why a 30-year-old player is still playing like this." So none of the steroid reveals had happened. So let's go on to the next slide. We asked about player relations in terms of the minimum salary. We asked what would it be in $03 in 2020. Today, it's 404. But 70% of our respondents thought that it would be higher. I think that there's a factor when you ask people to project out 17 years and take into account inflation, that becomes that becomes difficult. So I don't know that there's too much in that. The same thing happened around the median salary. There was a strong percentage thought that it would be a lot more. Again, I think that we were probably not. It wasn't effective for us to ask about it with inflation being taken into account. Nevertheless, 2/3 of people who responded to the survey thought that there would be a salary cap by now, and over 40% of our respondents thought that, 66% of our respondents thought that foreign-born players would constitute over 40% of Major League players by 2020. And in fact, in last year, that number was 29%. So that's another thing that hasn't happened. In terms of drug testing, there was a prediction that there would be testing for both performance enhancers and illegal drugs by now. Next slide, please. So then we thought that we would ask among players who were not yet in the Hall of Fame and players who are not yet being voted on for the Hall of Fame, who would be a first ballot Hall of Famer. And if we use the 70% cutoff, we can see that the respondents correctly identified Ripken, Maddox, Johnson, Gwynn, and Henderson as being first ballot Hall of Famers. They also predicted that Bonds, Clemens, McGuire, and A-Rod would be first ballot Hall of Famers. And of course, they're still not even in the Hall. So I thought that, that was pretty good. If we look at the players who actually made it on the first ballot and look at the support that they got, you can see that, Pedro Martinez did it at the time. Derek Jeter only was getting the support of 28% of the respondents. Eckersley would win in the very next election, and essentially nobody saw that coming. So pretty interesting. And then, of course, there were some younger players who were just getting going, like Chipper Jones, who would ultimately make it, and Jim Tomei. And we had a few people who actually foresaw that future in those players. Next slide, please. But you know who we left off? We left off Frank Thomas. So we got a lot of comments about missing Frank Thomas, and I cannot tell you how it was that we possibly left Frank Thomas off that vote, and we will now apologize for leaving Frank Thomas off. We also left off Mariano Rivera, Roy Halladay, Tom Glavine, Wade Boggs, and Paul Molitor, all of whom were first ballot Hall of Famers in the years after '03 and before this year. in the comments section, some of the other players that we were that we were told we should have included were Ichiro, McGriff, Kevin Brown, Kerry Wood, Greg Gagne, Trevor Hoffman, and Mark Pryor. So there you are. I mean, those guys were all looking as good as Jim Tomei back then. Next slide, please. Of course, Ichiro, I mean, wasn't even qualified, right? So we got some good comments about how A-Rod, he's only going to be 45 in 2020. And Ricky Henderson might still be playing. I had to laugh when I was reading through these, preparing for this. But certainly it's true. Pujols, he's not there. Soriano, what happened to Alfonso Soriano? You know, he'll continue playing past 2015. You know, he certainly looked that way back then. All right, next slide, please. There were some interesting comments about our home run guys. For their redefinition of the home run, Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire will both be first ballot. However, there was one guy who pointed out the rumors of enhancers will only get worse. Rafael Palmeiro will make it because he is very good and inoffensive. I so wish that I was presenting this live, because I know that this is getting some good chuckles out there, and I would love to be able to hear them. But like the baseball players this year, I simply don't have that live audience. All right. By the way, Sosa might be hurt by the cork bat. Yeah. Okay, next. Thanks, Jacob. All right. So in terms of the fans' enjoyment of the game, we asked some questions about, you know, how about the DH? And of course, American League fans supported it, and National League fans didn't support it. And this is exactly the bind that baseball has been in since the DH came in. American League fans love it. National League fans don't want it. So our survey reflected the same thing. Would the game time, which is now 3 hours and 5 minutes, be under 3 hours? 72% said yes. Only 27% were right. The average ticket price, which is now $32, which would translate to $24 back in 2003, 46% pegged it at that. That was certainly the plurality of the answers, so I think that was a pretty good hit. Will we be able to watch games at home with some kind of new technology? For example, holograms. There was a lot of discussion back then that we would be able to watch games as holograms projected into our living room, 3D representations of the game. And I can tell you exactly where that came from. That came from all of us baby boomers who were in our early 20s when Star Wars came out. And it opened with the princess talking to a hologram. So how much would this new tech cost? Same or less than the average ticket price was the answer of 68%. You can make of that what you will. It's certainly true that we have new technology for engaging with baseball. Next slide, please. Okay, what is going to, as ball players continue to be stronger and swifter, will the critical physical properties of the game and equipment used in the major leagues be different? We got a lot of people talking about the pitching mound being raised. And this is especially for my friend Meredith Wills, We had one comment, ball construction. It's almost oxymoronic. Even though players are getting stronger, as baseball will become more tightly wound to produce more home runs and ultimately more excitement for the crowd. So there you go. Next slide, please. We got a few other comments around the question of, will significant new areas of player specialization emerge? And it was noted that player selection will encompass more and more from Bill James type analysis. Well, that's pretty much right on the mark. Since Bill James type analysis, people are the ones who run the clubs now. There was another comment that the clubs will start to carry a super sub. And that is certainly true. If you can find a player now who is capable of subbing at almost any position, they're like gold. We had some glimmerings of people starting to think about how pitching might get redistributed and how there might be short starters pitching 5 or 6 innings. My favorite comment, though, was this. I'm not sure what the future holds, but I'm sure it will be something that will make no sense at all, such as the 7th inning pitcher, followed by the 8th inning pitcher, then the closer. In other words, 2 setup men in every game. And also another comment, I think pitching will continue to be specialized. I could see a 6th inning specialist, a 7th inning specialist. Well, yes, you do. Next slide, please. So there were some other comments that had me ask, do you mean an opener? How about starters who go 2 to 3 innings and hand the game to a bullpen? Thank you, Cecilia. Yes, bullpenning. So this is all about pitching by committee, pitchers pitching fewer innings, less expected of average starters. There you go. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Okay, and then for those of us who are deeply into the sabermetrics, will managers be using analytics for in-game strategic decisions? And so our foresight back in '03 is that 9% of us thought this would be forbidden. 48% thought it would be allowed, but most managers would ignore it. 12% thought it would be in widespread use, and 29% thought it would be commonplace for all aspects of managing the game. We asked about information services at ballparks. 20% thought that all ballparks would offer it, and 38% thought that more than half the ballparks would offer it. Of course, they all offer it, is the fact right now. Will electronic systems, we looked at that question earlier. Oh, and then I suppose I threw this in, being a Yankees fan. How many World Series wins for the New York Yankees? 7% said none, 49% said 1 or 2, which is correct, and 35% said 3 or 4. Next slide, please. We also asked for some other Hall of Fame crystal ball gazing, and would Joe Jackson or Pete Rose go in? So 53% think that Joe should go in, but only 29% thought he actually would. Pete Rose, 46% thought he should go in. 66% said he will go in. And again, this is by 2020, so neither of those things have happened. More Negro Leaguers. Very strong and uniform response on that, that there are more who should go in, and there are more who will go in, and in fact that did happen. Bud Selig got no real support from SABR back in '03. Only 6% thought he should go in. Only 14% predicted that he would go in, and in fact, of course, he is in. And for Marvin Miller, 48% thought he should go in, but only 38% thought that he would make it, and he has finally made it and will be inducted in 2021. But I'm going to say that he's in there now. Okay, next slide, please. So, anyway, here we are. We've got baseball 2020. Reality is biting. We have a 60-game season. It looks like the Spiders are going to return to Cleveland. There was some question when I prepared this as to whether Price or Trout would sit out. Minor league play has been canceled. The Hall of Fame inductions have been canceled. The All-Star game have been canceled. And that was so far outside of the possible realm of outcomes that we didn't bother to ask any questions about that. So there you have it. Thank you, Jacob. You can turn it off now.
Well, thank you, FX. That was fascinating. And I did actually find my copy of the survey.
That's great, Scott.
Being the pack rat that I am. Actually, I've been we're tearing up the carpeting in my office, so everything's going out of here. But
well, we had a good time putting that together, and I want to point out that Paul Ogle and Rod Nelson, a bunch of people in the Denver chapter, contributed mightily to this effort back then. And this was something that we worked on for about 4 months, starting in December of '02.
Yep, not a lot in the way of questions, lots of comments though. I can say that. There is one question: is it official that the Indians are becoming the Spiders again?
No. No.
And we definitely, as Cecilia pointed out, we definitely have to have another survey and that we can all look at 2040.
I think so. I think so. Let me look at some of the chat comments here.
Yeah, I'm flipping back.
No, thanks for posting the original, Jacob. That's great.
Yeah, I actually scanned in my copy and sent it to him. So.
That's true. Tara points out that Pete Rose hadn't come out about having bet on baseball, and that had a lot to do with the fact that there was a big differential between him and Joe Jackson, which I think somebody else pointed out. It popped up during the chat.
Yeah, Tara also pointed out that we did get holographic fans on Fox.
That's right. And David Libman is right. Ben Zobrist is the perfect example of one of those super subs. Yeah. Oh, you got there. That's great. Tara writes, we have holographic fans on Fox.
Yes.
Okay. I have a hard time turning on that channel, but I'll give that a shot and see what goes on.
Okay. So, actually, Mark also pointed out that that there was a panel on Baseball 2020 at the Denver convention as well. And I guess I assume this tied in with that panel. I didn't even remember that far back. I was there at that conference though.
Well, I looked on YouTube for it, but I couldn't find it.
No. All right, well, again, thank you so much. That was fascinating I think for everybody to as I said, open up the time capsule for us. All right.
Thank you, everybody, for coming along, and thank you, Jacob, for driving for me. We really appreciate it.
Okay, so we will, again, thank you so much, FX, again. And we're going to move on to the next one. And this should be Tyrone and Corey should be able to display now. They should both be co-hosts now. So our next half hour is going to be spent as a bit of a panel discussion. It's going to be on Major League Baseball diversity initiatives and social justice resources. The two folks who will be doing that, who will be having that discussion, are Tyrone Brooks, Tyrone joined the SABR Board of Directors in 2019. He's a senior director of MLB's front office and field staff diversity pipeline program, which was established to identify, develop, and grow the pool of qualified minority and female candidates for on-field and baseball operation positions throughout the industry. Prior to joining MLB, Tyrone worked in the front offices of the Braves, the Indians, and the Pirates. He's also the founder of the Baseball Industry Network, which covers the full gamut of people working in the industry of baseball. Thank you for joining us, Tyrone. And Corey Smith. Corey, who oversees the Diversity and Inclusion Department at Major League Baseball. He holds a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering and an MBA from Columbia. And he's a subject matter expert in procurement, strategic sourcing, supplier diversity, and overall diversity and inclusion. He spent the last 25 years working in a number of different industries, including manufacturing, technology, education, consumer products, entertainment, and sports and media. So welcome as well to Corey Smith. Oh, I see Tyrone. I think. Oh, it's Corey. I see Corey. Okay.
We're here. Absolutely.
Hopefully I see Tyrone.
Can you see me?
Let's see here. Right now, I guess Corey is speaking, so I see Corey.
Can you get me? You got me?
Yep, I see Tyrone now too. Yep, right. We've got both of you. So I'll hand it over to you guys.
Okay. No, thank you for allowing us to be here. We're glad to talk about some of the work that's being done with Major League Baseball, especially with some of our diversity initiatives and also things that are happening, especially now, a real hot topic within our game and within our country in terms of social justice. To start out, Corey's going to start out talking about some of the things with social justice. But first, we want to actually also display a quick video, which will last about a minute, and then we'll kick off the discussion from there. You have my screen. Can you see it clearly?
Right now, we just see you.
Oh, you just see me? Okay.
Share screen is always tricky here with Zoom.
Yeah, trying to.
Here we go.
Give me 1 second. Here we got it. All right. Here we go. There's a video.
We've been told that our peaceful pleas were not made at the right time, at the right place, in the right way. We've been told to wait. But we remember when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. warned us that the word wait
has almost always meant never.
We will wait no longer. We'll make our voices louder.
For all of us who can.
And for all of those who cannot. 8 minutes and 46 seconds is enough time to lift a knee.
To do what is right.
To say something.
To acknowledge the pain of the Black community.
You have cheered for us.
But we need you to cheer with us now. When we need you most.
Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter.
It's our cheer for change.
It's your cheer for us.
It's these cheers that will unite us.
One team. One dream. Be the change.
Or you there? Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we have a small presentation that we're going to walk through while Tyrone is pulling that up. I guess I can start. You know, obviously you saw the video, you saw the players' voices. I would be hard pressed to find anybody on this Zoom right now that hasn't paid attention to, you know, the civil unrest and kind of social injustice that has taken place in the last 2 months, although, you know, depending on who you talk to, obviously people will acknowledge that it's been taking place a lot longer than that. MLB, you know, of all the sports leagues, we were probably the last to respond. Everybody had a statement to say around a lot of this. But for us, it was really intentional to make sure that our words weren't empty rhetoric and that we were going to have some action behind our words. It was also, for us, very, very important that our players had voices. Our sport in comparison to some of the other leagues, our guys haven't necessarily always spoken out about some of these issues. You know, some of the other leagues, the NBA in particular, their guys are way more vocal, whether it's on social media or how they express themselves on the court. NFL, the same thing. We've kind of all watched what's happened to Colin Kaepernick over the last 4 to 5 years. And so baseball, we didn't really have that. And this was truly the first time that we saw our guys kind of say, look, enough's enough, and we're going to speak up. And it was really important for us as a league to support them and stand behind them. And it was kind of like, oh wow, if our guys are feeling that fed up that they are actually voicing their concern, it's time for us to kind of rally behind them. So, you know, that has been the catalyst for a lot of great movement in the last 2 months. But, you know, the diversity and inclusion department at MLB has been around for over 20 years. And so it's been interesting to see how people have responded to some of the things that we've done in recent weeks, as if diversity and inclusion at MLB like literally just started in June. And so, you know, we are a 20-year-old department. I personally have been with the league for almost 10 years, all of it in diversity and inclusion. And so we've done some really, really great things over time around diversity and inclusion in our game. D&I, we break the world up into kind of 3 buckets. The first being talent, which is around the recruitment and retention of diverse talent in our game. And so we partner with HR, we work with baseball ops, and, you know, while the diversity and inclusion department doesn't touch the players, we're obviously not involved in drafting players. D&I for us extends beyond the field. And so how we recruit talent into MLB, how we retain top talent within MLB, there is a diversity and inclusion aspect to that. And for us, it is really around, look, we need to be reflective of not only the world, but reflective of what our customer base looks like. So that's the talent side. On the business side, we really do look at how inclusion can enhance our business. And whether that's through innovation, whether that's through product, whether that's through technology, whether that's enhancing on field or off field, the idea that diversity of thought will lead to the best business that we can possibly be is top of mind for all of us. A key example of business diversity is our supplier diversity program, in which we make sure that our supply chain is diverse, utilizing minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, LGBT-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses, disabled-owned businesses as part of our supply chain, whether that's buying office supplies and furniture for our office or helping to renovate ballparks to prepare for a season. Who we utilize and businesses that we utilize to get that type of stuff done is really important to us, because that also ties back to economics, right? Because now we're spending money. Now we're helping these businesses thrive and develop in their communities. And then the last piece is the brand. And for us, branding from a diversity and inclusion perspective is quite simple. Anytime anybody looks at a logo, the MLB logo, a club marker logo, how does it make them feel? Do they feel attracted to our game and included in our game or not? And so as a Black man, as a Hispanic woman, as an Asian child, as a disabled individual, what do you feel when you see these logos? Do you feel invited into our game? So that's D&I and some of the background and backdrop. Specifically as it relates to recent events and current events, we've done a series of initiatives that speak to how MLB feels it can aid in social reform. Again, you'd be hard pressed to see anybody, whether you politically, religiously, in any sort of way, take a particular side on this issue. The killing of innocent people is wrong. Period, point blank, end of story, regardless of what you feel about anything else. And so certain things just, we recognize that there's a need for change and MLB should be involved in those things. The first thing we did, particularly internally for our employees, because we saw that there were a lot of people struggling with how to identify this subject and how to talk about this subject. I had department leaders and department heads saying, hey, I want to have this conversation with my department, but don't quite know how, don't want to say the wrong thing. Can you assist me? The first thing we did was we created a social justice page on our website. That's actually free and accessible to the entire public. While we designed it for employees of MLB, it is completely free and accessible to anybody that is a fan of baseball. It's mlb.com/social-justice. And it's an information and resource guide. It has everything from definitions and terminology on how to say the right thing to how to talk about racism and social injustice in the workplace, how to talk about it at home with your children and your family. We have books to read on the subject, podcasts you can listen to, articles you can watch. Like, we took this page and made it as comprehensive as possible for a novice in this conversation or someone who feels that they are quite versed in this conversation, such as other diversity and inclusion professionals. And so the social justice resources page has become quite popular, especially within the employees of MLB. You know, one of the external facing things we did, if you guys are looking at the screen, you can see the logo for MLB. We actually inverted the logo. If you look at that logo, this is literally the first time in MLB's entire history in which the batter in our logo is presented as Black. Any other time, literally in MLB's over 100-year history, the batter in our logo has always been white on a darker background, on a multicolor background, the traditional red and blue background. But something so small was such a symbolic gesture. One, it was, again, hard to believe the first time something like that has ever happened. But we've never put the batter as Black. And fine, it's in black and white, so you could interpret it purely as that. But it was symbolic, and it's meant us standing in solidarity with our players. There are tons of allyship and advocacy avenues that we're pursuing. If you watch the draft, a draft night, the commissioner spoke about Black Lives Matters, and we stand with that. We have a zero tolerance policy on racism internally and on the field. There was a donation, $1 million donation between the GMs and the clubs. The GMs put up the money, the clubs matched it, which was great to see our GMs step up in that regard. $1 million went to 5 different groups: Campaign Zero, Color of Change, EJI, Jackie Robinson Foundation, and NAACP LDF. That sort of, again, gesture, it was really around action, not just words. And so more action is coming. We have 2 huge initiatives that we've launched. the pro bono program that we launched, where employees of MLB are going to be able to donate their time and skill to organizations and diverse businesses that are focused on these issues. And so, you know, small businesses that are diverse owned that may need legal help or marketing help, they might need somebody to help them redo their website. Well, guess what? We've got a massive legal department, a huge marketing department, an advertising department, an IT department, and our employees are some of the best on the planet at some of these areas. Why not donate some of your time free of charge to help some of these businesses and organizations further in advance? So the pro bono program is coming. I actually saw a pilot of the website that we're creating yesterday, and we should be launching it pretty soon, where organizations will be able to go in and complete a profile saying, hey, I need help in this particular area. And then our employees can go in and say, hey, I'm an expert at XYZ, pair me up with somebody looking for that skill set. The second initiative that we launched and is already underway is Diverse Business Partners Recovery Project. So as a subset of our supplier diversity program, what we did was say, look, in some of these cities in which there has been serious protests around the recent events, unfortunately, protests would then turn into rioting once the sun went down, which would unfortunately then turn into looting. And I'm always mindful to make sure that people understand those are three very different things, and usually by three very different groups of people. The peaceful protests that took place in the day are not the same group of people that are then looting at night. But unfortunately, as a result, we saw many businesses through the looting destroyed. And so MLB said, hey, look, this would be a great opportunity to help some of these diverse-owned businesses, Black-owned businesses specifically, rebuild. We know they're going to go get their insurance claims and they're going to get some money to do that, right? But if we're great partners and we're great neighborhoods and we're great advocates and we're great allies, we can help some folks rebuild their storefronts, rebuild their businesses. So we identified businesses, obviously, in cities in which we have ball clubs, help them rebuild. And, you know, it aligned that some of the cities in this country that suffered the worst looting were in cities in which we have ball clubs. You're talking about, you know, LA, Minneapolis, which unfortunately was kind of ground zero in this particular case because that's where George Floyd was murdered. New York, DC, Atlanta. So we are going through the process of identifying businesses that we're going to help them rebuild their efforts and rebuild their storefronts and hopefully open up bigger and better. And so those are just two examples of initiatives that we have coming that clearly says, look, we recognize this is more than a moment, it's a movement. It is time for change. And MLB has stood by long enough, and we have said, you know, we are definitely going to advocate and be an ally for this change. Our players are 100% behind us. If anybody watched opening day last night, you saw the Yankees and Nats game. I've been fielding questions for weeks. Well, what are you going to do if your players kneel? Last night, you saw everybody kneel. And so thankfully, I don't have to answer that question anymore. But again, great effort of freedom to express themselves. MLB fully stood behind our players in their efforts to express themselves in that regard. And we even love the unionship and solidarity that took place on field. You saw the same thing with the Dodgers and Giants game last night as well. And so, you know, we are also extremely mindful that, look, we've got a bunch of work to do internally, right? We know there is a lack of diversity at the GM level. We know, you know, you see what's going on with, you know, the NFL and the Redskins saying they're going to change their name. You know what? Let's be candid. We've got a couple of club names that are a little insensitive as well, and we potentially may need to change those as well. And we'll get to that point when we're ready to take that charge. But there's no way we can do all this goodwill externally and not look internally and look at ourselves as well and recognize that we have more to do. So I guess I'm going to turn it over to Ty now. He's going to talk about some more of our initiatives and some of the other things that we're doing, which are great and longstanding. And again, I want to be mindful, like, this is not reactive work. We have been working at this stuff for years. And all we're doing is leveraging what's going on right now to amplify, quite honestly, some of the great work that we've been doing. So thank you all for your time.
Thanks, Corey. You know, as we you look at when Commissioner Manfred took over with Major League Baseball as the commissioner, one of the things he made a real huge priority for him was to see about how we can create a true pipeline in terms of really helping to start to change the face of our game and looking at how we can get more women and persons of color into opportunities in the front office. I've been very blessed to now join the commissioner's office since 2016, at the beginning of that year, with the creation of the Diversity Pipeline Program. And through this program, we've had an opportunity to really start to create an influx of change in our industry as a whole, getting people into those first entry-level spots into our game, which are vital for someone to have long-term success. You really have to truly start somewhere. With the pipeline program, so far we've been able to assist in over 200 plus hires, understanding that a key element in our game is getting individuals into those internships and those first entry-level points, whether full-time, also part-time. But the key thing is just getting people in the door and those different opportunities for both front office roles and on-field roles. As part of that, as we first started out the framework of building out this program, we truly tried to evaluate exactly what was going on currently within the industry, looking at how are some of the current trends within the industry, and also seeing how we could capitalize and really create an opportunity that would have some impact going forward. With that, in the fall of 2007, we officially announced the creation of the Diversity Fellowship Program, which is basically creating a full-time opportunity within the front office in the baseball operations department of a major league club. And also, we also added 2 spots within the commissioner's office. Our first class, we officially announced that class in May of 2018 with 22 fellows that came into the program with 18 participating teams. We were very fortunate to have this group of teams that came in. They were very committed to seeing change and also providing a great opportunity within that front office. We were very fortunate that in that first class that was selected, 18 of the 22 are currently still working in our game presently. 16 of them were hired full-time, and it's a good testament to those individuals who came in really very eager, looking forward to the opportunity, and came in and really made it a point to make an impact within the organization, and they're going to continue to do so going forward. So we're really excited about how this opportunity has helped to start to create some change throughout the industry. More teams have gone about creating similar type programs as well to kind of augment as well what they're doing in terms of really trying to create opportunities. Right now, we are in the midst of going through the process for our 2020 class. We're expecting to have approximately 21 organizations to be a part of that. Right now, clubs are going through the process. We were a slight pause because of the pandemic. As you can expect, that has created a lot of also additional change in our industry and what we're dealing with. We're excited about this 2020 class and how this class will have a chance to make a really good impact as well. Another element that we've really tried to look at as a whole is look at the former player and how we can try to help that former player make the transition successfully from going from the playing field to a front office role or on-field role. And one of the things that was created just last year is the former player internship program. And this has created an opportunity for that former player. We're also looking for women that have good baseball or softball backgrounds to come into opportunities where they can get a chance to transition into the 6-month internship that we have, which is an exciting opportunity. Our first class of this program, they're in the midst of going through it now. Those that were selected were able to go through a little bit of an orientation during the course of the baseball winter meetings back in December. So that was an exciting opportunity to bring them all together. We had a great group of individuals that were involved in a lot of the giving advice and helping for these individuals that were coming through. Individuals such as Chris Young, who's a vice president in our on-field department. We also had Jerry DePoto from the Seattle Mariners, who's also a former player who transitioned to a front office and has had a good career path going to be a GM. at multiple teams. Bobby Scales, who's currently a field coordinator with the Pittsburgh Pirates. We also were lucky to have Dave Roberts, who's the manager of the Dodgers. He was also involved in this process and helping to really help educate the group that we have just starting out. So, we're looking forward to continuing to build upon this program as an opportunity to help individuals make that successful transition into an on-field or front office role. One area that we've also additionally have really tried to make a really big importance to us is how we can help women fully make their way into roles that have traditionally been unavailable in many cases, getting into areas such as scouting, coaching, umpiring, athletic training. So back in 2018, we created what's called Take the Field. And we've had 2 classes of this program that have allowed us to have an opportunity to bring in women interested in these areas, and also really making it a partnership with our 30 major league clubs and getting their staff to be involved in the whole process of teaching and going through several days of really good programming to help individuals make their way hopefully into the industry. If you look at, we've had 83 participants have been a part of it so far. 41 of them have been able to have some type of experience within a club following their opportunity. And then 24 have truly been hired into opportunity. So we're really excited in how we're continuing to grow this opportunity to get women into this area and really having them come together truly and they're building a network both with individuals throughout the industry and also for themselves as well. And it's something that we're going to continue to build upon. We were very fortunate, even in the first class that we had. If you look to the left here, Alyssa Knockin, who is now the first major league coach, first female major league coach in the big leagues. She was actually part of the first class that attended. Also this year, Christina Whitlock is with the St. Louis Cardinals in her first year. And also to the right in this photo, Veronica Alvarez, who has spent the last 2 spring trainings working with the Oakland A's as a batting practice pitcher and coach for them, has been involved. She also is the manager of the Team USA women's baseball team that competes every year. So we're really excited. We were also very fortunate to have 2 individuals that have come into coaching roles this year, Rachel Balkovic of the New York Yankees and also Rachel Folan of the Cubs. The 2 of them were involved with some of the instruction and helping our group that we brought in back in December. So, we're looking forward to how we can continue to build on this program and continue to have individuals make their way in. I truly believe, and we believe as a whole, as an organization, that this is just the start of this process. So we're really excited about where we're headed in terms of the direction of getting more women into really significant roles, both in the front office and also into on-field roles. So it's something that, we're very committed to, and we really look forward to how we can continue to grow things on this end. So just really excited about how we're going to start to continue this process going forward. We'll be, we're really excited how we're doing. We'll be glad if you want to take a question potentially and see what we have here. Maybe if there's something you would love to take a question, if there was something that was available. So.
Yeah, it's Scott. I'll ask a couple of questions. We've only got a minute or 2, but there were actually a lot of comments, a lot of questions, a lot of good discussion in the chat. You can flip through it as we go through the next presentation, but I will, there was couple of interesting questions. One, there was a little bit of surprise that so many of the teams are not participating in the internship program. Is that a program that's funded by the teams, by the league? How is that?
The program is actually funded by the individual clubs. So we're actually looking forward to, and the commissioner has already made it a big point that when we get ready for our class of 22, which will start in the fall of 21, we're expecting to have all 30 clubs to be a part of it. It's something, I think, based off the success of the very first class, that has really helped us to make sure, hey, we're going to make sure we push to have all 30 clubs to be involved in that process. with everything with the pandemic, that has kind of hurt a little bit in terms of this current class from a timing standpoint. But no, we're expecting to have full participation from throughout the entire league when we get ready for the fall of 21, going in for that class of 22.
Yeah, I think a lot of the early questions that were in the chat, you guys actually answered through your presentation, which was great. One other quick question, kind of a quick question, but one other question Scott Fisch had is, how is the league and teams going to navigate police rate relationships going forward? You know, there's that close tie that we've seen for both security and promotional and ticket sales, and you know, how are you going to balance that with the systemic racism that we're working through as part of BLM and as part of the whole process we've been going through over the last 2 or 3 months?
Absolutely, I'll take that.
Yeah,
the conversation is ongoing. You know, there isn't going to be some massive, wide, sweeping, league-wide, you know, ban on police. You know, the reality is not all cops are bad, right? And so while there are issues, and you know, even internally, I have to balance having this conversation, you know, wearing my professional diversity and inclusion hat and navigating these conversations, but also being a Black man in America, right? And so I understand the sensitivities around something like that. For us right now, it is a club-by-club decision. Again, we haven't made any wide sweeping league-wide mandates. From our security, our RSAs, you know, at the club level as well as the commissioner's office, we utilize former police, Secret Service, FBI, like, you know, the guys that we bring on board are professionally trained and skilled individuals. That is what we are targeting when we employ these guys. You know, certain clubs, the Twins in Minneapolis, again, Minneapolis was ground zero for these recent events, have made some pretty clear statements about their potential use of police moving forward. And then we've had other clubs in other cities do the same. They've already come out and made their statements, either for or against. And again, as a league, what we plan to do is support the clubs at their individual levels on the decisions that they make. Overall, I think to the extent that MLB can serve as a catalyst for conversation around reform, you know, without jumping into the pool of politics, which is hard to do when you talk about, you know, potentially changing laws and that sort of thing. But at least guide people in a direction in which there isn't a percentage of this population that is in genuine fear of police. If there is such a thing, I think that's a promising aspect of which MLB would love to take the lead in. That's kind of it right now. That we haven't come out and made any statements that we're against the police, and nor would MLB ever do that. That's not our position or in life to do. We play baseball. But, you know, again, I do think that as America's pastime, we probably have more influence in steering this country in a better direction than even we probably realize. And so, you know, all of that is being analyzed.
Thanks so much, Garry. I know that's a tough thing. That's
on a heavy subject. It's a heavy.
Yeah, it is.
No answer is ever going to make everybody happy. So
yeah. So I throw one last question in, and then we'll need to move on because we are running a little over here for Jeff, who's getting, I know is getting ready down there. There was a question about from Garry about the importance of increasing diversity among the MLB players. We talked through that. You know, one of the barriers is there are so few full ride baseball scholarships at the NCAA level. You know, what is there anything we can do to address that so that, you know, we can, you know, the other sports obviously have a lot of that, that where you get the opportunity to have the education and also, you know, learn the sport, grow in the sport. That's a little harder to do in baseball because there's so little in the way of those full ride scholarships. Is there any partnership that's being worked at the NCAA level?
As part of that, it's a little bit somewhat difficult in terms of, the NCAA obviously has their mandates in terms of how things are set up in terms of scholarships. They did make a recent change, which should help a little bit, is in terms of now individuals will have the ability to have other, truly merit-based and need-based scholarships they can get that actually won't count against their actual count of their 11.7 that they have. So there's an opportunity to continue to try to help individuals to have, more and more funding to be able to, afford the ability to actually pay for college. So we're just really excited. It's good to see that that's a major step as they're moving forward at that level. But it's something that definitely we all see there's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of how we can continue to try to help on that end. And we're going to continue to do things on our end. A lot of our programming that we put in place, led by Tony Regans, has really been giving kids exposure and doing things so them and their families don't really have to pay money, so they can have the ability to get, the ability to showcase themselves through our various diversity-based events that we have, including the Hank Aaron Invitational and the Breakthrough Series, as a way to help that individual get that exposure they need without their families also having to pay a ton of money in terms of the different showcase events that do take place. So we have the ability to put together teams that do compete in a lot of the various showcases, in which we cover all the costs that are incurred as part of that really save those families from having to pay that. So it's something that we're just continuing to build out on that front. And obviously the importance of getting an education is huge, and using baseball as a vehicle to get an education.
Thank you, Tyrone. Thank you again, Corey. This was a great conversation, an important conversation. I'm glad we were able to have you guys here for that. And thank you very much again.
Let me say one last thing also. Just want to
Sure.
give a quick shout out to Anthony Salazar, who is the head of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. And I'm glad to be a part of that committee. Looking forward to how we can continue to help do things here with SABR, continue to grow the organization and keep us going in the right direction. So thank you.
Yeah, I know Anthony had a couple of questions in there too. We just didn't have time to get. In fact, while we were talking, I see 30 more messages came in the chat window. So, so I'll let you guys read through some of that while we move on to Jeff. But again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Much appreciated.
All right, let's move on to Jeff and Jeff Snider. He's going to talk about the disappearance and reappearance of Garry Templeton's records. Jeff's a editor-in-chief at Baseball Essential and the co-host of the Locked On Dodgers podcast. He joined SABR in 2011 and has contributed to the SABR Baseball Cards blog. He grew up in Southern California as a Dodger fan, now lives in Pleasant Grove, Utah. And actually, he sent me an update to his bio, and I just want to make sure I add that he is a Dodger season ticket holder despite living 700 miles from Dodger Stadium. So I will turn it over to Jeff. Oh, we can't hear you. Are you still muted? No? Hey, Jeff, I can't hear you. I'm not sure if anybody else is.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, I can hear you now.
Okay, great. Yeah, it's a little daunting to follow a presentation as serious as that last one with something as silly as statistical records. But Garry Templeton is maybe a good subject for that. So before I jump into my presentation, I just thinking about listening to Tyrone and Corey speaking and thinking about Garry Templeton. One of his unfortunately most memorable moments of his career was along these lines when he ended up being suspended for 3 weeks and actually forced to undergo counseling and receive a psychological evaluation because he lashed out at some fans after being on the receiving end of racial epithets after he didn't hustle as hard as the fans wished he did. And it actually led directly to the the souring of his relationship with Whitey Herzog and his eventual trade to the Padres. And it's a little bit sad that that worked out so well for the Cardinals, since, you know, we'll talk more about how that trade worked out for the Cardinals. But yeah, Garry Templeton is maybe a good subject for this. So I will jump on in. Let me share my screen and we'll get started.
Love your bobbleheads, by the way.
Well, thanks. Okay, can you see my presentation?
We can.
Okay. And you can just see the one slide, right?
Yep.
Okay,
You're
perfect.
in presentation mode. You're good to go.
Perfect. All right. So thank you all. Like Scott said, I am Jeff Snider, and I'm going to be talking about Garry Templeton, because why wouldn't I be? So growing up in Southern California in the 1980s, I was and still am a Dodger fan, but where I lived, Jack Murphy Stadium and Dodger Stadium were about the same distance from my house. So when you factor in San Diego traffic versus LA traffic, it took about half the amount of time to get to a Padres game as it did a Dodger game. And so I saw Garry Templeton play in person a lot when I was growing up. I was obsessed with baseball, and by extension, baseball cards. And both of those things are still true. I still have tens of thousands of my baseball cards from my childhood sitting in a closet in my basement, and way more than that sitting in this office where I am, much to my wife's chagrin. I had a lot of baseball cards, but not a lot of friends. And so I spent a lot of time looking at the backs of baseball cards. So I can do any division problem down to 3 decimal points, because that's how you do batting average. I know that Bob Walk never led the league in walks, but he did lead the league in wild pitches in 1988. I know that Jose De Leon twice had to be removed from his team's starting rotations to avoid getting to 20 losses in a season. And because of the backs of baseball cards, there are 2 things I knew growing up about Garry Templeton. By the time I was following baseball, he was already on the Padres, but I knew how the Padres had acquired him. They traded Ozzie Smith for him. The Padres maybe, looking back, might not have made that trade in the future, but at the time it was 2 up-and-coming budding superstar shortstops. The other thing, the second thing I knew about Garry Templeton, before I tell you, can any of you guess what these 26 baseball cards all have in common, besides having Garry Templeton on the front of them? They all tell the same fun fact about Garry Templeton. I won't read all of them, but I'll read a few. Did you know, first switch hitter in Major League history to collect 100 hits from both sides in a single season? Collected 100 or more hits from each side of the plate in the 79 season, the first switch hitter ever to turn this trick. Led the NL in hits in 79 and became the first player in history to achieve 100 hits from each side of the plate in one season. Here's a whole card dedicated to Garry Templeton becomes first with 100 hits from each side of plate. Became the first switch hitter in history to get 100 hits from each side of the plate in one season. You see where I'm going here. There's 26 of them. I don't have screenshots of all 26 of them, but trust me, I looked at all of them. Some of them are O-Pee-Chee, so this fun fact is mentioned in both English and French. Donruss seemed to be the most fond of this stat. They mentioned it on every single Garry Templeton card Donruss ever made, mentioned this stat. By the way, I wanted to thank the trading card database for making it so easy to quickly look at the fronts and backs of every Garry Templeton card, because digging them out of my closet in my basement would have been a pain. So the second thing I knew about Garry Templeton, obviously, is that he was the first player ever to have 100 hits from each side of the plate in a season. Or was he? That's what we're here to talk about. So I have a friend named Brian. 99% of our interactions are about one of 2 things: how my taxes are looking, because he's the guy who does my taxes, and baseball trivia. And it varies from day to day which of the 2 subjects our wives find less boring or more interesting. So a couple of years ago, Brian stopped by my house to have my wife and I sign our tax forms. And he asked me who was the first player ever to have 100 plus hits from each side of the plate in one season. And look, you saw those 26 baseball cards. You know I knew the answer. And I even knew that Willie Wilson had done it the next year too. But then Brian and I started talking, and we were wondering if anyone had done it since Templeton and Wilson. I couldn't think of anyone, but there was part of me that thought maybe it was like a floodgates thing where, like, I remember when I was a kid, there were only a couple handfuls of 50 home run seasons, and then you blink and suddenly it's tripled and Brady Anderson's on the list somehow. So I pulled up Baseball Reference, the play index, now known as StatHead, and I did a search for switch hitters who had 100 hits off left-handed pitchers in a season. I took this approach, of course, because there are fewer lefty pitchers, so the right-handed hits would be the harder part of the feat. And guess what? My search returned 0 results. If I lowered the threshold down to 90 hits, I got 3 results, including Templeton in 79 and Willie Wilson in 80, the 2 players who were reported to have accomplished this switch hitting feat. And as you can see, Templeton only had 94 hits against left-handed pitchers in 1979. Of course, there's no rule that says that you have to take the platoon advantage as a switch hitter. So I looked at Templeton's 1979 splits, and sure enough, he did bat right on right a few times. Baseball Reference credits Templeton with 2 hits as a righty against righty pitchers. But still, 94 plus 2 only equals 96. So according to Baseball Reference, Garry Templeton only had 96 right-handed hits in 1979. And so I let this stew for a couple years. And last June, I was sitting at the SABR convention in San Diego. Actually, my first SABR convention. As Scott mentioned, I've been a SABR member since 2011, but finally got to the convention last year. And I was sitting there listening to some great presentation. And I was just thinking, man, somebody should figure out what's going on with Garry Templeton's record. And then because I was in the land of inspiration, I thought maybe that someone should be me. I have a subscription to newspapers.com. Let's see what we can do. So I set off to figure it out. So I'm going to keep a running hit tally throughout this presentation to keep track. So we know that Templeton had 94 hits off lefties, and we see him credited with 2 right-on-right hits, although we're going to need to track those 2 down. Either way, we're falling way short of 100, and I went into this project wondering how they managed to get things so wrong back in 1979. Why on earth did they think Templeton had 100 hits right-handed? Our first clue comes from a book called Cardinals Journal by John Snider. No relation. He spells Snider wrong, but that's okay. I'm sure he has good qualities too. That book explains Templeton collected his 94th hit from the right side on September 22nd. Upon learning that no one had ever gotten 100 hits from both sides in the same season, he began batting right-handed against right-handed pitching to get the record. So I looked at Templeton's hit log, and I found all of his hits off right-handed pitchers after September 22nd. Unfortunately, there were only 5, which means even if all 5 of them were batting right-handed against right-handed pitchers, that still only gets us to 99. So I became even more convinced that I was likely to find that Templeton didn't reach 100, but I still had the possibility that I might be able to correct some missing records, so I soldiered on. So let's look at those first 2 hits against Dan Larson. Could I find any contemporary evidence that he batted righty against Larson in those 2 hits? You bet I could. Here's what it says in the St. Louis Dispatch the day after that game. And he did it right-handed against right-handed pitcher Dan Larson. Templeton, a switch hitter who has a league-leading 206 hits, is going head-to-head with right-handers because he wants 100 or more hits from each side of the plate. He currently has 111 from the left side and 95 from the right. So we have 2 right-on-right hits. Are those the 2 that Baseball Reference is talking about? I don't know for sure. But either way, we can take the question marks off our tally, and we're up to 96 right-handed hits. So what about the 2 against the Pirates pitchers, Don Robinson and Kent Tekulve? Well, we have evidence for those too. Templeton has been hitting righty this past week against all pitchers. The hits gave him 97 from the right side. Templeton was retired twice by left-hander Dave Roberts, but again, batting right-handed, he singled in a run against right-hander Don Robinson in the 4th, walked against right-hander Doc Ellis in the 6th, and doubled against another run home in the 8th against Tekulve, a diabolical right-handed sidearmer. The hits gave him 97 from the right side and raised his major league leading total to 206, one more than teammate Keith Hernandez, who also had 2 hits. That's Michael Farber in the Montreal Gazette on September 28th. So now we're up to 98 hits right-handed. So we might not get to 100, but at least we know that I have a correction I can submit to Baseball Reference, because we know that he had more than the 96 they gave him credit for. So what about Juan Berenguer, our fifth one on our list? I couldn't find any explicit evidence that Templeton batted righty for this particular hit, but we know two things. We know that he was chasing the feet, and we know that he hadn't yet accomplished it. So the circumstantial evidence is pretty strong, and it's going to get stronger. So our running hit tally now: 94 as a righty against lefties, 2 as a righty against Dan Larson, and 1 each as a righty against Don Robinson, Kent Tekulve, and Juan Berenguer. That's a total of 99. But uh-oh, we're out of hits. So that was all of his at-bats against right-handed, all of his hits against right-handed pitchers after September 22nd. So before we call it a day, is there anything we missed? Well, let's look through our previous evidence. Remember the Dan Larson evidence? That article said that Templeton was sitting at 95 hits right-handed, but we only had him at 94 at that point. He ended up with a total of 94 hits off lefties, but the final 2 of those were off Pete Falcone, and they had not yet happened. So at that point, he had 92 hits against lefties and the 2 against Larson. So that's 94, which means either the article about the Larson hits was wrong, or we missed one somewhere. So let's keep looking for other clues. Here's another clue. 2 articles from September 29th give us a little new info. First, the Chicago Tribune says Templeton made the decision to bat exclusively right-handed on September 20th. And the AP said that he had been batting righty the past 9 games, which means our date was wrong. The date from the book, September 22nd, was wrong. I had been looking at hits after September 22nd based on that, but we need to go back a couple days. And boy, oh boy, did we find some good stuff. Rick Hummel of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch on September 21st, he wrote, after reaching 1 switch hitting milestone Thursday night, Garry Templeton immediately set his sights on another. Now Templeton wants to be the first switch hitter to compile at least 100 hits from each side of the plate. But since he has only 89 right-handed hits now, and since the Cardinals have just 11 games to play, Templeton said he would modify his approach. With manager Ken Boyer's permission, which he obtained after Thursday night's game, Templeton will bat right-handed anytime he wishes the rest of the season. Now, that just says that Templeton can bat righty anytime he wants, but it doesn't prove that he did. This one from the Associated Press is a little bit more explicit. Afterward, Templeton conferred with Cards manager Ken Boyer and said he will bat only right-handed for the remainder of the year in a bid to become the first switch hitter in Major League history to total 100 hits from each side. So that says Templeton will bat exclusively righty the rest of the year. It still doesn't prove that he did, but it sure is strong evidence. So now that we've adjusted our date, let's look at an updated hit log against right-handed pitchers. And what do you know? There's one more hit against John Pacella of the Mets on September 22nd. I can't find any explicit mention anywhere that Templeton batted righty against Pacella, but it was his very first at bat against a right-handed pitcher after declaring that he would bat righty against righties. So it's a pretty safe bet that he did. So that gives us our final tally. 94 hits as a righty against lefties, 1 against John Pacella, 2 against Dan Larson, 1 against Don Robinson, 1 against Kent Tekulve, and 1 against Juan Berenguer, for total hits as a righty, 100. 98 we have explicit proof for, and 2 more with extremely strong evidence. But circumstantial evidence, no matter how strong, isn't quite proof. So just in case there's any lingering doubt, here's Rick Hummel on September 30th, giving us the exact stats that match the timeline of Templeton making his decision on September 20th, including 6 hits right-handed against right-handed pitchers. Hummel said, perhaps the most significant aspect to Garry Templeton's achievement Friday night of becoming the first switch hitter to record 100 hits from each side of the plate was that in the last few days, Templeton hit 400 batting right-handed against right-handed pitchers. He was 6 for 15 against right-handers in that stretch. And, said manager Ken Boyer, Templeton showed him that he could bat from that side all the time if he wanted to. So, in summary, with Templeton sitting on 89 right-handed hits, he conferred with his manager and got permission to bat exclusively right-handed the rest of the season and stated his intention to do so. He had 11 more hits that season, including 6 against right-handed pitchers. 4 of the 6 are specifically mentioned to have come right-handed, and the other 2 have extremely strong circumstantial evidence. And the numbers in every account from the time line up with this established timeline. So in conclusion, in 1979, Garry Templeton did, in fact, have 100 or more hits from each side of the plate, becoming the first player ever to do that. So what can we learn from this? First, we're not always smarter than our predecessors. It's easy to assume that we know more now than people did before Al Gore invented the internet. It's important to remember that's not always true. My goal going into this project was to figure out how everyone got this wrong in 1979. You know, what was the key moment where they thought that he was at X number of hits, but he was actually at Y? As it turns out, they were right, and we just didn't know it. But sometimes, maybe we are smarter. For example, Willie Wilson in 1980. He's currently only credited with 99 hits. And believe me, I wanted him to be a part of this presentation, but I can't find any evidence of that 100th hit. So there's a good chance that maybe Willie Wilson didn't actually accomplish this in 1980. Another thing is the order in which we find our evidence sometimes drives our research. If I had lucked into finding the September 20th date earlier, a lot of this would have gone a lot more quickly. Some of the most compelling evidence were those articles from September 21st, which was outside the window of my initial searches. But on the other hand, if I'd found the 2 Rick Hummel articles, one from September 21st saying he was going to bat exclusively right-handed, and one from September 30th saying he batted exclusively right-handed, and here are the stats, I might have been tempted to call it a day, and the results would have been less satisfying. And finally, Garry Templeton was a stud. He learned that nobody had ever done this thing before, and he said, I want to do that. And then he did it. That's my kind of ball player. The end. Thank you for listening. My contact info is up there if you want to reach me. And I will stop sharing my screen now and open it up to questions.
Thank you so much, Jeff. That was a great presentation. You got some great compliments on there. Several people pointed out this reminds them of presentations that Herm Krabenhoft has given in the past, and
is he the Tigers guy?
That is a high compliment.
Is he the Tigers guy?
Excuse me?
The Tigers, the guy who looks into old Tigers stats and stuff?
Among others, yeah.
I think it might have been when I was listening to him last year that I had this idea.
Ah. Okay, well that's good. It's interesting because now it's kind of jogging my memory. I'm just old enough to remember 1979, and I think I vaguely remember that whole discussion about Templeton hitting right-handed against righties. So that was kind of interesting. One other comment that came up was Pete Cottrell wondered if you presented this to RetroSheet, and I can tell you have, because I'm on the board of directors of RetroSheet, so I'll make sure Dave knows about it.
Yeah, I actually did. I emailed both Dave Smith and Sean Foreman and got replies from both of them, accepting my research and committing to updating their records. I haven't seen the updates on either site yet, but they have both personally responded to me. So.
Well, that's great, and both of them are very responsive to everyone. They view that as their job to be totally responsive. So that was great. Let's see. So there's a question from Scott Bush. Are you assuming that Templeton's hit totals are correct, going back from before September 20th?
Yeah. So I actually created a spreadsheet of every Garry Templeton plate appearance with the pitcher's handedness and everything, and I confirmed all of the split totals before that too, based on handedness. When he's facing Steve Carlton, he's batting right-handed. When he's facing, Tom Seaver, he's batting left-handed. And so I confirmed all of those, and yeah. So the short answer is yes, Scott.
And one last question here. Well, let's see. There's David Lippman asked, so have you shared this with Garry Templeton yet?
I've tried to. I reached out. Brad Baluchkin wrote the book earlier this year, Wax Pack. What was it called? The Wax Pack Gods? Or no? Is that what it's called? I feel bad that I can't remember the name of Brad Baluchkin's book right now. The Wax Pack. It was just called The Wax Pack. And one of the people that he talked to in that book was Garry Templeton. And so I actually reached out to Brad, and Brad reached out to Garry Templeton for me. And unfortunately, Garry Templeton was not interested in talking to me about it. I'm not sure why. And Brad was a little bit surprised about that. And then there was I have another acquaintance on social media whose son played on a baseball team with Garry Templeton Jr. And he told me that Garry Templeton Jr. has read my article that I wrote about it and loved it, but I don't know if that's gotten back to him. So I don't know for sure if Garry Templeton is aware of this research or not.
Okay, well, Mark Armour asked, so will you commit to annual presentations now?
Yes, if Mark will commit to giving me good ideas, I will commit to doing the work.
Well, thank you so much, Jeff. That was again an excellent presentation, a real detective story, and everybody loves a good detective story.
Well, thanks. Yeah. Oh, I see a comment. I assume this is this David Smith right there? It says Smith.
Oh, that probably is.
This was corrected on retro sheet with the new release 2 weeks ago.
There you go.
It should be, I assume, what Sean Foreman told me was that once retro sheet had updated theirs, then that would trickle down to Baseball Reference. So I haven't seen that yet, but I assume that's in the works. So.
Yep. That is where Baseball Reference gets that data. So it will be there.
Excellent.
Okay, so I'd again like to thank everybody who presented today. I'd like to thank. Oh wait, I've got the. Let's see, was there one more question? No, that was just another comment. Okay, so again, thanks to you, Jeff. This was again another outstanding day of presentations. I think one of the things that we've definitely learned through this whole process is that there's a tremendous depth and breadth of research here at SABR, and we could have so many more of these presentations. Just intent. So just final again, thanks for Tyrone and Corey for their fantastic discussion of the diversity initiatives. Thanks to FX for our little time capsule discussion, and thanks for Gordon on the hit by pitch discussion. I think all those were again excellent discussions today. So that will conclude our presentations for today. Tomorrow we will be back again. Like I said, tomorrow is a 3 o'clock start, correct, Jacob?
That's right, 3 o'clock Eastern, 12 o'clock Pacific.
Okay. So we'll sign off for the day. And again, thank you to everybody.